Members of council, if you can please take your seats. Members of council, can you hear me now? Okay, please take your seats. This meeting is now resumed. Pardon? What did I say? Oh, remove? Okay. Can we please stand for the national anthem? Thank you. Please remain standing, and during this time, please remember the following person who has passed away: Ronald Jimmy Ashford Wisdom. Thank you. Councillor Cole.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd just like to say a few words about the passing of Wisdom. As his formal name was Ronald Jimmy Ashford Wisdom. Jimmy Wisdom came from the Montego Bay Boys Club, where he learned the art of singing and entertaining, and in his first life, he performed alongside the likes of Bob Marley. He also was performed with Jimmy Ruffin, Otis Redding, Solomon Burke, and Fats Domino. So that was his first life. He immigrated to Canada, and in Canada, he continued his musical career. But he decided he needed to make some real money for his family, so he established a barber shop, first of all down on Bathurst Street, then eventually up on Eglinton West. But Jimmy Wisdom was much more than a talented artist, musician, much more than a barber, which he was very proud of being a barber. He was really the mentor of the West Indian community in Toronto, the sage, the philosopher, and an incredible advocate for inclusion, diversity, and for progress. Jimmy, along with his partner for 37 years and love of his life, Merva, really inspired so many young people who were immigrants to Canada, transitioning into Toronto, and really gave them that hope for the future. Jimmy was also a fierce fighter. He stood by me and the speaker when the Eglinton subway was canceled. He said this was wrong, it was a betrayal of the people of Eglinton West, and that he would make sure that someday the Eglinton subway would be built. And Jimmy, again, had an inspirational career, and one that, again, it is really immeasurable in terms of the impact he had on the tapestry, the multicultural tapestry of our city. And he was a builder of this city in more ways than one. And people like Jimmy Wisdom need to be recognized and honored for the contributions they made to what Toronto is today, a much more accepting, much more diverse, and much more understanding city. So we salute you, Jimmy, or as he was known, Wisdom, and we will certainly miss his leadership, his sage advice, and his example. So walk good, Jimmy, and we will never forget what you did for our city and what you will continue to do for the future of our diverse and loving city. Thank you.
Thank you. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. For the benefit of those who are connected to the internet, the city clerk has posted all of the agenda materials for today's meeting at toronto.ca/council. Members, we have a presentation this morning to recognize Sean Gannon, Executive Director of Housing, on his retirement from the City of Toronto. I would like to call upon Deputy City Manager Juliana Carbone to come forward for the presentation.
Good morning, everyone, Madam Speaker, Mayor, members of Council. Thank you for this. He doesn't. Thank you for the opportunity to thank and recognize someone who's so very well respected within the city, across this country, by all orders of government, the private and the nonprofit sector, for his deep, deep knowledge, commitment, passion, and drive for all that is housing. Sean Gannon has spent over 40 years in the housing field. I understand that he started with the Federation of Metro Tenants Association back in 1978. He moved on to work with Metro Tenants Legal Services, defending tenants against high rent increases. In 1985, he entered the realm of public service as the Chief of Staff for Ontario's Minister of Housing, Alvin Curling at the time. He did many things while he was at the province, but he did play a key role in developing and launching Ontario's Assured Housing Strategy. It was an initiative directed at creating 3,000 rental homes, including not-for-profit, transitional and supportive housing. And then in 1993, he made the leap to municipal government. He was the executive assistant for former Mayor Barbara Hall. He went on to work with former Mayor Mal Lastman after amalgamation, and then David Miller. And then in 2006, he finally saw the light, and he joined the Toronto Public Service as the director of the city's first affordable housing office. And most recently, he's been the executive director of the Housing Secretariat. Needless to say that for over 30 years, Sean has been pretty instrumental in helping advance Council's housing goals, providing creative housing solutions to meet the diverse needs of our residents and families, our neighborhoods, influencing provincial and federal strategies and agendas, and establishing strong, resilient partnerships with the not-for-profit and development communities. In fact, some of Sean's major achievements have been delivered in partnership with private sector developers, community and nonprofit associations, other governments. Among the many things that he's accomplished over his long career, he's been instrumental in creating Canada's first rent bank program that was for former Metro Toronto. The City Streets to Home programs that we're all familiar with is still quite successful. He was instrumental in developing the first portable rent SUP. It was developed in response to the eviction of residents in Tent City back in 2004, and it was really the precursor, the foundation of our creation of a housing allowance program that we all know today, and of course the city's open door incentive program. There are many specific affordable housing projects that wouldn't be in existence today without Sean's commitment, but there's one that I wanted to note, and I think he's quite proud of, and that's the conversion of Pan Am Village into one of the biggest most successful affordable housing projects that we know today. It's currently operated by Gannon and Fred Victor. And then, of course, to top off this already amazing career, this past year, Sean was the architect behind Council's Housing Now program. And at today's council, you're going to be debating and discussing the city's second 10-year housing plan for 2020 to 2030. It's a plan that's very much focused on helping people, neighborhoods, and families. If approved, it's going to assist over 341 households move into a better life across the full spectrum of housing. So how do you appropriately thank someone who has helped make Toronto stronger? Don't worry, Sean, I've got my Kleenex, but I'm not going to break down until I sit down. He's helped so many families and residents and neighborhoods be better off. And he's also helped the nonprofit housing providers become more resilient. And that's all because of his incredible leadership, his commitment. Sean, you have built a small but mighty housing team that's going to continue your great work after you're gone. You've created quite a legacy, and they're going to deliver on the city's new 10-year housing plan. You should be very proud. I know you have family and friends here, Marissa and Gabe, and I know you have another son out east. Marissa, on behalf of all of us, I also want to thank you and your family for sharing Sean with us all these years. I know that you've been a key support for him as he worked relentlessly here for our city, for our programs, for our residents, and we very much appreciate the support that you provided him. So Sean, on behalf of all of us here, a sincere and heartfelt thank you for all you've contributed. I'm good. For your unwavering commitment, your integrity, and your professionalism. We're going to miss you, but we wish you much happiness, much time with family and friends, listening to jazz, and I hope you think of us every once in a while because we're going to be thinking of you.
Thank you.
Not yet. Not his speech yet. My turn. That was not fair, Juliana. Well, so at retirement, it's usually the time where you come with all those wonderful stories, and for a lot of people, we're all saying, where did these stories all came from? Like, I don't remember. But that's not the case for Sean. We all have very good stories to tell, and we know that they're very, very true. I had the privilege of starting working with Sean since the day I got elected. So for the last 9 years, I've been working side by side with Sean, and proud to say that I've learned so much from this public servant. So he's been an outstanding and invaluable partner as we worked on the housing file. He has been a strong and supportive leader for those across the city that are looking to have a safe and a home at the end of the day. He has been an incredible public servant, and I'm not going to repeat his career accomplishment where he's been, like Juliana said. But more important than all, I think for me, Sean has been and will continue to be a wonderful friend. And I'm proud to say that. It is hard to believe that Sean began working on the housing file 30 years ago and actually accomplished so much in a very complex file in an environment that not always easy to move the ball forward. So I think that no person anywhere who knows and understands the housing file like Sean does. I think like Juliana said, he's recognized inside City Hall, but he's recognized and respected from the nonprofit sector to the private sector and all orders of government. And I've participated in many conferences across our country with Sean, and it's incredible how housing leaders in the sector and in other orders of government know Sean, know of his reputation, and seek his leadership and his advice. So it's nice to see that recognized. But there's two things that I think Sean taught me, and I would like to mention in here. He keeps reminding me that housing is about people. It's not the bricks and mortars, it's about people. And that as we are creating policy, that we always remind ourselves that we created it from a place that has a bed to sleep at home. And I think that's what makes Sean different. It's about people, and make sure we understand how privileged we are. So that's, I can't continue anymore.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Maybe for many politicians, they always feel proud and they like to say they know it all. I feel very proud to have worked with this man for 9 years and say that I've learned so much from you. Thank you, Sean.
Well, there remains not much to be said, certainly not in the context of your sterling record, Sean, but I do, first of all, I want to say that it's always important to read the fine print. And Julianne, I would only say to you that you can now see what others put you through this morning, well, Sean has put you through by retiring. And so you just take note of that, of how difficult an assignment that made you. And someone else would have to do that if you ever decided to do that. So don't even give any thought to that. And Sean, in your case, I would say, just like Masai Ujiri the other day, I said to him that he didn't realize that what went with being named the most influential person in Toronto was the commitment to stay for the remainder of his life in the City of Toronto. You clearly have not read, unusually for you, the City of Toronto Housing Action Plan for the next 10 years, which says right in it that you have to stay for another 10 years. So this is all, I don't understand why this is all happening. But I will say on a serious note this, that I have not been here as long as some others that have spoken. But I came here with respect for public servants, and my encounters with public servants subsequent to my being here my respect has only increased. And one of the public servants it has been my pleasure to spend the most time with has been you. And you have demonstrated throughout all of that an absolute professionalism that I think is beyond much of what I've encountered in business or anywhere else that I've had the privilege of working. You're incredibly hardworking to a fault. You are an incredibly collegial person. You're determined, you're committed, you're compassionate, and I think, but more than anything else, you're just professional. I mean, and to me, that's the highest compliment I can pay to somebody that is in any line of work in public service or anywhere else, is that you're a professional. The second thing I would just say is that you achieve results. Juliana and Anna talked about specific projects that exist today that are standing in the city housing people, as Anna said, that stand as a testament to your hard work. And the housing plan that we have today that we'll be discussing today is a work of a lot of people, but you were the leader on that team. And then finally, I would just say that I don't go to a lot of conferences, but I went to one in Vancouver not that long ago, and I could see in that entire room of people drawn from across the country to talk about housing by Maitre and the FCM, that the person that was probably held in the highest regard in that room, and it was turned to most often for his opinions and for his comments and so on, was our very own Sean Gannon. And that, to me, was a source of great pride for our public service and a richly deserved tribute to his excellence in the job. So, as you know, just like when you help the United Way, you get a T-shirt. When you retire from the city, you get a very nice scroll, and it is much less than we would like to do, but it is, I hope, rich in meaning for you, together with all the remarks that have been made today. We're just incredibly grateful for your contribution, and I'm incredibly thankful personally that I had the chance to work with you for the last few years. There's lots to show for it on the part of all of us, so thank you.
Thank you very much.
John, I want... Well, before Sean speaks, I just have a few words to say about Sean. I've known Sean for over 30 years. He grew up in the former city of York, and we've worked very closely in the past 30 years. And he was also a constituent for quite a few years in the city of York. But the reason I want to acknowledge Sean and make comments is in the 70s, in the former city of York, the council of the day decided that they wanted to demolish the seniors' residence that was at the corner of Weston and Humber Boulevard. And there were a number of seniors that lived in these homes. And at that time, my brother was on city council in York, and they fought against demolishing these buildings. And Sean was very involved in that at that time. And it was the first time they fought, and they saved Beach Hall. And then from there, it was the first co-op in the city. And it is now, and it's very thriving now. And Sean has been working with these seniors over the years and was able to renegotiate their lease just recently and was able to get funding to do upgrades to the building. And in appreciation of the work that he's done, just recently, Sean and I, and we attended their Christmas event, and they presented him with a gift, which was very touching. And Sean, you've been involved, and you were very, very dedicated to the seniors at Beach Hall. And at that time, they were ready to demolish these buildings, and the bulldozer was there, and we were able to stop the bulldozer. And actually, if you want to read the story, there is a video on it. So thank you, Sean. I know on behalf of the Beach Hall seniors, they appreciate your dedication to them and your hard work. Thank you.
You going to start the clock? Actually, I have a few very brief remarks to make. Thank you very much, Mayor Tory and members of council. I'm quite humbled by today. And thank you for the trust and confidence that you've had in me as I've worked together with you to create a home for people in our city. Toronto is a special and a unique place, and it's been an absolute honor to serve the people of Toronto and City Council over so many years. I was first appointed to the Housing Standards Appeal Committee for the City of Toronto in 1982. So my work on housing has gone back many, many years. My parents, Maura and Harold Gannon, chose Toronto as their home after serving during World War II in the British Air Force and Navy. Growing up in the neighborhood of Mount Dennis, I was always taught to care about my neighbors and my neighborhood. And being the son of two World War II veterans, I was often reminded of my duty to serve, protect, and value our democracy. I was also taught about the importance of making a difference in whatever I did. And to stir it up along the way, my mother would say to me, be a pebble in their shoe to make change. She taught me that we could make a better world. And I hope in the work that I've done in my career in the course of the last 40 years that I've done some of that. There's a lot of thank yous I'd like to make today, and particularly those that watched over me, people that saw potential in me as I grew, and also helped advance the agenda for decent and affordable housing in our city. To my many family and friends, some of which are here today, that were, quote, the wind in my sails, that fueled me up, gave me the power to keep going. My brother Mike, who is with me today, and my sister Maureen, to my partner, Marissa Dodero, who has kept me going with much love and affection. My two sons, Jesse and Gabriel's with me today, who cheered me on. And my two grandchildren, who live in Wolfville, Nova Scotia, Beatrix and Henry, who provide my life with humor and with a lot of hugs. I've worked with many federal, provincial, and municipal politicians over the decades, and I want to thank every one of them for their commitment in building a better Canada. Today, I'd also like to make a special mention of Deputy Mayor Anna Baila, who, as the city's housing advocate, is Toronto's true housing champion. Anna, thank you for your dedication and the commitment to working with the city's housing sector and for delivering real results on housing for the people of Toronto. And during my career, I've also been mentored and supported by many, many people. And a special thank you goes to Deputy City Manager Juliana Carboni, who I deeply admire and respect for her professionalism and her commitment to public service. A big thank you also to the many dedicated civil servants who I've worked with over the years, including the staff in city planning, legal, buildings, real estate, finance, city manager's office, shelter housing and support, social development and finance, and basically the cluster of people that make Toronto work and house Toronto's people. You do amazing work and you make it happen. And to my own staff and the Housing Secretary, thank you so much for everything that you've done to make it a success. Lastly, I want to thank City Council, you. City Council does important and vital work I consider of the highest order. And in my view, you are the front lines of our democracy. At the same time, I don't think I need to remind you that even at the best of times, you're a challenging bunch of people to work with. You are really challenging to work with. But I do hope that in my own way, that I've helped you in the job of making Toronto a better place, a more equal place and a more inclusive city. A city where everyone is welcome. A city where everyone has shelter and a home. And a city where everyone can fulfill their potential and succeed. I will miss you all, oddly enough. But I do wish you the very, very best in the future, and I won't be far away. Thank you so much.
I will now call for a motion to confirm the minutes. Councillor Carroll, you have a motion on the minutes from our last meeting?
Yes, Madam Speaker. The City Council confirmed the minutes of Council from the regular meeting held on November 26th and 27th, 2019, in the form supplied to the members.
All those in favor? Carried. I will now call upon the committee chairs to introduce their reports. The chairs can speak about the reports for up to 5 minutes. Mayor Tory, you have a motion to introduce the Executive Committee report?
I do, Madam Speaker. I move that the report for meeting 11 of the Executive Committee listed on the agenda of Council be presented for consideration. We discussed many different things, all of them important, but in particular I just want to draw briefly attention, as we will later this morning, to a report from Ernst & Young. And it was interesting because, and I want to, give credit where credit is due. My initial reaction was somewhat hesitant or skeptical when I heard that the province had on offer some funding to allow us to take a good, solid look at some areas we could find improvements in the way the city government was run, but we said yes to that, and the report that resulted from that, well, it had a number of ideas that are still off being considered. It had some immediate benefits that will be shown in the 2020 budget that fast as things that were upon consideration, things we could do to run the government more efficiently and to save money in the sense that we're saving it so that we can apply it to other kinds of priorities, whether it be child care, community safety, or transit, or a host of the other things that we have a responsibility to do. Our financial limitations these days, and I can't repeat this often enough, and we know it in this chamber, our financial limitations imposed by the fact that we're expected to carry out responsibilities, deliver programs, and deal with people who turn to us first without adequate support, albeit that it's been improving, but it's still not adequate from the other governments, makes it imperative that we seek out every opportunity to find ways in which we can save money. And I think that we've done much better than we get credit for at that, and this was another chapter in that regard. And there are other things that are now being given due consideration by the public service to see if they too can be added to this list going forward. The other thing that I'll just mention, because we're going to have lots of time to discuss it today, is that the Executive Committee took what I consider to be the bold and sensible stance to help the city to provide for its capital needs going forward. We have, as a city government, since I've been here, maintained solid, stable leadership with respect to the operating budget, and the fact that we have managed at one and the same time to keep property tax increases as they relate to the operating budget at or below the rate of inflation at the same time as we have not only invested record amounts in housing, in transit, and in other areas, but also managed to maintain the confidence of our credit rating agencies, who continue to say that the city is well managed and have maintained our very high credit rating in place. But the savings that I referred to in the Ernst & Young report save us millions, even tens of millions over time. When in fact the need on the capital side for the transit and the housing that are going to make sure we protect our success and make sure that, and this is the ultimate test, I think, for us as elected representatives, which is 10 years from today, will people say the city is as successful, is as well managed, has taken the steps to provide for its people on things like transit and housing, and those are the investments that are going to be made as a result of the decision to support at the Executive Committee level, which I hope will be replicated here today, support the $6 billion that will be made available through this levy to create the affordable housing we need and to make sure that we keep the transit system well supplied with vehicles and so on and in a state of proper repair. And so I'm looking forward to those discussions that will happen today on those items, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong, you have a motion to introduce the Civic Appointments Committee report.
Yes, good morning. That the report from meeting 11 of the Civic Appointments Committee listed on the agenda of council be presented for consideration.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson, you have a motion to introduce the Economic and Community Development Committee report.
Yes, I do, and good morning, Speaker. That the report from meeting 10 of Economic and Community Development Committee listed on the agenda of council be presented for consideration. There were a number of items on the agenda, but I'd really like to draw our attention to just one specific item of the items that were on the agenda. That's EC 10.8, and it is a long-term care implementation plan. It's an update, and I'd really encourage members to read it. If you have already read it, I'd encourage you to read it again, because it's extremely important in terms of what is being done here. We have had a lot of discussions about this particular issue. We've talked about the different type of models that are out there available to help our seniors and so on, and our most vulnerable people in care. I'm really happy to report, Speaker, that our staff, led by the great, talented Mr. Paul Raftis, has done a tremendous amount of work. They've consulted with a lot of our staff members who are doing the work, the external community, to work on addressing these issues. They've come up with a number of recommendations that are here, increasing the amount of time to offer care to our seniors, as well as looking at adding FTEs going forward to be ensure that the plan that's implemented will be able to help our seniors, which is extremely important. Looking at the diversity of our city with respect to how care is actually offered to our residents and so on, it's extremely important. I'd also like to simply say this, that they have now come up with what is termed the emotional-centered approach to care for our seniors, which I believe is extremely important. They have looked at all of the best practices and models from around the world and have copied varying elements that is now a made-in-Toronto solution to address the needs of our seniors who are in our long-term care facilities and so on. It is extremely important. I'm also happy to say, Speaker, that the team have not simply consulted and put information on paper. They have also put in place and had a pilot program that was essentially monitored by two reputable doctors, Dr. Lynn McDonald and Dr. Reza Mara from the University of Toronto. I'm really happy with the work that they have done. I'd like to thank them for the work that they've done. And again, I want to thank Mr. Raftis and his team for the focus and the intention that they're paying with respect on this extremely important issue dealing with our seniors in care. So thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Ainsley, you have a motion to introduce the General Government and Licensing Committee report.
Good morning, Madam Speaker. That the report from meeting number 10 of the General Government Licensing Committee listed on the agenda of Council be presented for consideration.
Thank you. Councillor Pasternak, you have a motion to introduce the Infrastructure and Environment Committee report.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. That the report from meeting 10 of the Infrastructure and Environment Committee listed on the agenda of Council be presented for consideration.
Thank you. Councillor Balau, you have a motion to introduce the Planning and Housing Committee report.
Yes, Madam Speaker, that the report from meeting 11 of the Planning and Housing Committee listed on the agenda of Council be presented for consideration. Just want to bring your attention to a couple of items. I mean, obviously, the housing plan is one of the mayor's key items, so we'll be discussing that. But we also recommended the second site of the Housing Now, so 140 Merton Street is the second rezoning out of the program Housing Now, and will be today in front of us. So it's good to see the program moving forward and at the speed that it is moving. Also, the Community Housing Partnership Renewal Program, which is already a recommendation in this plan, and we already have a report in front of us, which is actually to continue to support some of the nonprofit housing providers in our city that have their mortgage and their agreements coming to an end. And so it's a commitment from the city to continue to work with these nonprofit housing providers. Also, some new opportunities in front of us, both at Broadview, and we're looking into the revitalization of Dundas Shelburne and how we can add more supportive housing in this area as well. So I want to thank the committee for a full agenda that we had, good discussion that we had, not only on the housing plan, but many initiatives that are taking place across the city.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong, you have a motion to introduce the Striking Committee report.
Yes, thank you. That the report from meeting 4 of the Striking Committee listed on the agenda of Council be presented for consideration.
Thank you. Councillor Ford, you have a motion to introduce the Etobicoke York Community Council report.
I do, Madam Speaker, and good morning, everyone. I move that the report from meeting 11 of the Etobicoke York Community Council listed on the agenda of Council be presented for consideration.
Thank you. Councillor Pasternak, you have a motion to introduce the North York Community Council report.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Madam Speaker. That the report from meeting 11 of the North York Community Council listed on the agenda of Council be presented for consideration.
Thank you. Councillor Karygiannis, you have a motion to introduce the Scarborough Community Council report.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That the report from meeting 11 of the Scarborough Community Council listed on the agenda be presented for consideration.
Thank you. Councillor Perks, you have a motion to introduce the Toronto and East York Community Council report.
Good morning, Speaker. I move that the report from meeting 11 of the Toronto East York Community Council listed on the agenda of Council be presented for consideration.
Thank you. Councillor McKelvey, you have a motion to introduce the new business from city officials.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That new business from city officials listed on the agenda of Council be presented for consideration.
Thank you. All those in favor of the motions, recorded vote.
Councillor Cole, when you're seated, please.
The motion to introduce the reports carries unanimously, 23 in favor.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? Please indicate the committee, the item or motion number, and the nature of the interest, and remember that you must also file a written declaration of your interest with the city clerk. No. I will now call for petitions. Are there any petitions at this time? Members of council, before I review the order paper, I wish to make a ruling on item EX 11.25 regarding the St. Lawrence Center redevelopment. The city clerk has advised me that upon review, the confidential attachment submitted on this item does not meet the requirements for exclusion under either the open meeting provisions of CODA or the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. Accordingly, this information is public. I will ask the city clerk to make this attachment publicly available on the city's website. Members, I will now review the order paper. The mayor has designated item 11.1 headed Value-Based Outcomes Review Findings and item PH 11.5 headed Housing TO 2020-2030 Action Plan as its key matters for this meeting. These will be the first items of business today. I propose that City Council consider item EX 11.26 on the City Building Fund with the Mayor's first key item EX 11.1. These items were considered together at the Executive Committee. Mayor Tory, do you consent to the joining of the items?
Speaker, thank you.
Okay, thank you. The notice of motion run-through is scheduled for 2 p.m. tomorrow, only if the mayor's key matters are completed. I propose that City Council set a time for a closed session if required later in the meeting. Members, there are a number of related items on the agenda that are proposed to be considered together. T 11.5 on 1141 Bloor Street West, 980 Dufferin Street, and 90 Croatia Street, official plan amendment and zoning amendment application request for directions report. With T 11.6 on intention to designate under Part 4, Section 20 of the Ontario Heritage Act, inclusion on the Heritage Register, alterations to a heritage property and authority to enter into a heritage easement agreement, 90 Croatia Street and 980 Dufferin Street. And T 11.9 on alterations to heritage properties, authority to enter into a heritage easement agreement and designation under Part 4, Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act, 301, 303, 305, 309, 311, 315, and 319 King Street West. With CC 13.8 on 301 to 319 King Street West zoning bylaw amendment application request for direction regarding local planning appeal tribunal hearing. The city clerk has noted the items members wish to hold. I will now go through the items listed on the order paper to take additional holds. I will recognize requests to make matters urgent and time-specific after I go through the items for additional holds. Once the order paper has been approved by council, any change will need a 2/3 vote. Page 3. Councillor Holliday.
Good morning, and thank you, Madam Speaker. I wish to hold EX 11.2, the 2020 rate-supported budgets, 2020 water and wastewater consumption rates and service fees. And I would also like just to request a recorded vote on EX 11.14, which is the request to establish a community police office at 200 Poplar Road.
Okay. So recorded vote for EX 11.14.
Councillor Perruzza, Councillor Carroll, please. Thank you. And Councillor Fillion, please.
Councillor Karygiannis, please.
Councillor Carroll, please.
The item is adopted, 18 to 6.
Thank you. Councillor Crawford.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I did have two, but the first one was being held. Can I hold EX 11.5, Toronto Public Art Strategy?
Thank you. Councillor Bradford.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to hold EX 11.4, rate supported budget for the TPA.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Speaker, and good morning. I'd like to hold EX 11.13, improving communications for Toronto hydro projects.
Thank you. Councillor Wong Tam.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'd like to hold EX 11.10, 2018 Office of the Emergency Management Update. And I would ask that EX 11.11, the creation of a lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered, queer, and two-spirited council advisory body, if I can have a recorded vote on that, Madam Speaker.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Recorded vote on the EX 11.11.
The item is adopted unanimously, 24 in favor.
Councillor Perks, page 3.
Speaker, I had held 11.6, the Parkdale Hub Project feasibility study. I can let that go.
Okay, on page 3, 11.6, Councillor Perks is releasing.
A recorded vote, please.
Recorded vote. On 11.6, the Parkdale Hub project. Recorded vote.
Councillor Carroll, please. Thank you.
The item is adopted unanimously, 24 in favor.
Page 4. Councillor Crawford.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Number EX 11.25, the St. Lawrence Centre redevelopment.
Thank you. Okay. Page 5. Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong.
Yes, I'd like to hold two items. GL 10.4, request to write off an intercompany receivable for TO Live, and 10.6, City Hall Council Chamber modernization options.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I did have a quick motion to move on 10.6, but Councillor Minnan-Wong's held it.
Okay. Thank you. Page 6. Councillor Bala.
Madam Speaker, I can release PH 11.4, and on 11.2, we could move it with a recorded vote and a motion from Councillor Matlow that I'm okay to move if it's ready. Is it ready?
Okay, just no? 1 sec. So you want to release 11.4, and then 11.2 you want a recorded vote?
Yeah.
Pardon?
No? Okay. So I'll have to continue to hold 11.2, so I'll just release 11.4.
Okay, 11.4, right?
Yep.
Okay. All in favor? Carried. Page 7. Councillor Baila.
I can release 11.12, 11.14, And I would release 11.7 with a recorded vote.
Okay, 11.7, Counselor Holliday was still.
I'll continue to hold that.
Okay, so we're releasing 11.12 and 11.14. On 11.12, all in favor? 11.12, all in favor? Carried. 11.14. All in favor? Okay, Counselor Cole would like to hold it. Okay, so Counselor Cole is holding 14. Counselor Wong Tam.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. PH 11.10, activating a revitalization plan for the Dundas-Sherburne neighborhood. I would like to have a recorded vote on that item. Thank you.
Okay, on page 7, 11.10, recorded vote.
Counselor Perruzza, please.
Councillor Matlow, please.
The item is adopted unanimously, 23 in favor.
Counselor Matlow.
Madam Speaker, with your indulgence, I'd like to go back to page 6, item IE 10.12, Eglinton Connects.
IE 10.5?
12.
12, sorry, okay. Thank you. Page 8. Page 8, Counselor Ford, on page 8, EY 11.18.
Yes, Madam Speaker. I do have a technical amendment that could be dealt with pretty quickly on your behalf. On EY 11.18, zoning review, 70 Glen Scarlet Road.
If we can
This
put
is
the
from
amendment
staff.
on the screen. This is staff as requested the amendment. All in favor? Carried. On page 8, Counselor Cole, are you on page 8? You keep switching your name. Okay.
I would like to hold NY 11.4 and NY 11.28.
Page 9. Counselor Bailao.
Madam Speaker, on 11.4 and 11.6, I believe we're doing them together. Is that correct? TE 11.5 and 11.6, you had ruled.
It's 5 and 6.
Yeah.
Yes.
I would just like to have a recorded vote on that and just a brief comment to thank everybody involved, in particularly the nonprofit housing providers and my community, the community group. I think that the land trust that came out of this project, it's an important step forward to creating housing in our ward and in our city. And this was a difficult project, but I think that everybody really came together and worked really hard to have something really positive coming out of this, and I just want to thank everybody, and in particular the community. Yes, recorded vote.
Recorded vote on 11.5.
Deputy Mayor Minnan Wong, please.
Councillor Mallow, please, and Councillor Bradford.
Item TE 11.5 carries unanimously, 24 in favor.
Okay, 11.6, recorded vote.
Councillor Karygiannis, please.
The item is adopted unanimously, 24 in favor.
Thank you. Councillor Bradford.
Thanks very much. On item TE 11.4, I'd like to move the supplementary recommendations from committee. Thanks staff for their work on this.
Okay, we have the supplementary report, okay. All in favor? Carried. Item is amended, all in favor? Carried. Page 10. Councillor Fletcher.
Yes, Speaker, TE 11.23, Gerard Carlaw Planning Study Update Report. Thank you.
Cute. Councillor Holliday.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. TE 11.14, application to remove 5 private trees, 801 King Street West. Like to hold that, please.
Cute. Councillor Perks.
Thank you, Speaker. On page 10, TE 11.35, residential on-street permit parking status update on the expansion of on-street permit parking in the Toronto East York Community Council areas, Ward 4, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 19. I can release that. I'll keep holding it then.
Okay. I don't know what that buzzing is. Oh, okay. Apparently it's Councillor Perks' mic. Page 11, if we can clear the screen, page 11. Councillor Bylaw, page 11.
TE 56, 57, 59, and 61, I can release all that, Madam Speaker.
Okay. She's releasing all of them. So on page 11, T 11.56, all in favor? Carried. T 11.57, all in favor? Carried. T 11.59, all in favor? Carried. T 11.61, all in favor? Carried. If I can have someone hold 65 because it's here without a Councillor Matlow, you'd like to hold it? It's in your ward? Yeah, okay. Page 12. Councillor Wong Tam.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'd like to hold CC 13.9, 100 Wellesley Street East, zoning bylaw amendment application, request for directions.
Okay. Okay. I will now consider request to make items urgent and time specific. Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. On EX 11.4, it was held by Councillor Bradford. I know I'm not it's his item, he's holding it. I just wanted to make sure that TPA, the CEO of the TPA was here to answer questions. And maybe that it needs to be held and made time specific because of that.
Okay.
And I leave that to Councillor Bradford to consider as he's holding the item.
All right. Yeah, okay. All those in favor of adopting the order paper and all items not held, recorded vote.
Councillor Cressy, please. Councillor Layton, when you're seated, please.
Councillor Crawford, please. Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong, please.
The order paper is adopted unanimously, 24 in favor.
Thank you. Members of council, I want to stress the importance of preparing your motions in advance. The clerk staff are here to help you prepare your motions. In particular, if you intend to move a motion during the release of holds, I will insist that your motion be prepared in advance and given to the clerk. If you do not have your motion ready, I will not recognize you, and I'm also reminding members that you must state your motion first before you speak to it. Members, I have considered Council's request from the previous meeting regarding the urgency of motions without notice submitted during the meeting. Council has asked that I maintain a strict definition of urgent business and ensure that more information is provided to members before they are introduced, and that the motions adequately describe the reason for urgency. Council's procedures contain a definition of urgency. I will ask the clerk to display it on the screen now. Okay, there it is. Yeah. If you have an urgent motion without notice you wish to bring forward at this meeting, please give your motion to the city clerk staff. Your motion must clearly state the reason for urgency. Staff will prepare the necessary procedure motion from... Please. Staff will prepare the necessary procedure motion for my review along with your motion. I will continue to review all motions without notice carefully, and I may ask you to provide more information about the urgency of your motion and why it can't be routed through normal committee channels. This will inform my decision on whether to consent to your motion and, in turn, council's decision about whether to add your motion to the agenda. The purpose of your motion and your reason for urgency must be clear. I will advise council after each recess which motions I have agreed on are urgent and that need a motion to add to the agenda. This will require 18 votes to add a motion without notice to the agenda. Motions added to the agenda in this way are not subject to a vote to waive referral to a committee or agency. We will now go to the Mayor's key item EX 11.1 to be considered with EX 11.26. Questions of staff? Councillor Holliday.
Yep, thanks, Madam Speaker. I wonder if I could ask staff about some of the outcomes from this review. So there's an attachment, there's the E&Y report, and in there's a number of recommendations, and it sort of struck me as odd that we had this report and we didn't have recommendations that were bound to it. We didn't carry forward the E&Y recommendations forward, and I wonder what the principle was behind that or the thinking. Are we doing everything that's in these recommendations at the back of the report? For instance, means testing. I know one of the deputants talked about that. I wonder if somebody could elaborate.
if I can, through the speaker, the answer to your question is that we'll be introducing recommendations that have been put forward by EY through our budget process. So there are certainly some of the recommendations which will appear in the 2020, and we'll give explanation as to why they make sense. And then other recommendations will take longer for us to review and verify their validity, and you'll see them in subsequent budgets.
So, for instance, the means testing item, isn't that consistent with some of the findings of the Auditor General recently, just talking about our ability to develop processes around testing income levels, going to the getting that information from the federal government and so on? And I just wondered, you know, where that is. I mean, it was a recommendation from the AG.
Through the speaker, yes, we are looking in community and social services. Many of the means testing requirements are within our program areas. They're subject to legislative requirements as well. And it's a combination of both income verification as well as other eligibility requirements that are needed in order to be eligible for many of the provincial support programs that are provided through the city to the residents. So we are looking at that. We'll be reporting back later this year.
Okay, I just wanted to touch upon a question. I had a chance to ask a little bit about it earlier, but didn't have a lot of time. In the E&Y report and then in the staff covering report, and I'll go to page 4 of the staff covering report, it talks about the value-based outcome review identifying that the city's policy responses to income inequality, poverty, and affordability has resulted in a greater role as a service provider and an administrator of income redistributive programs than many other comparable municipalities. Although the review does not comment on the city's broad policies, it does identify that as property tax, the city's primary revenue source, that it does not benefit from income or economic growth. And I just wondered, could you give me a comment? Is our income redistribution programs a substantive portion of our budget and a substantive portion of the money that we collect through property taxes? It seemed to me that it's in the millions and tens, maybe hundreds of millions.
So through the speaker, there's a combination. Many of the programs, such as Ontario Works, et cetera, the benefits paid 100% by the province, and then they share on the administration. On the shelter side, there's a cap on that funding, so then there's more tax funding that goes in to support that particular program. So I can't remember the broad range, but we received like over $1 billion in provincial subsidies in order to provide those benefits to some Torontonians.
So as a principal, we act as a service manager. The federal or the provincial government gives us a pool of money to distribute in this income redistribution process, but I think this report is pointing at it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that we involve ourselves in income redistribution programs, and we go to the tax base to fund those.
So through the chair, through the speaker, you'll recall that back in the early 2000s, the main one is housing. They downloaded housing to the municipal level. They put a cap on the funding that we receive, and that's why recently Council increased its subsidy to TCHC. That is through the tax base. So there has been some decisions made through prior provincial governments that has put more of a pressure on the city. You have to recall as well that before social housing was downloaded to municipalities, the province built that system out. 90% of the GTA's social housing is in the City of Toronto. So naturally, we have a larger, more vulnerable population that we have to continue to support.
So does staff have concerns, and I think you have pointed them out, that the property tax base is a very difficult place to fund income redistribution because it doesn't grow with the economy. It is only based on our mill rate and on the relative distribution of values of homes, as opposed to the income redistribution that the federal and provincial governments do because they have access to income, and it's a progressive tax system. The more you make, the more they can take from you and redistribute it. Do you have concerns with that?
Through the speaker, the staff, particularly early on when these programs were downloaded, expressed concerns, and Council did take positions asking the province to reconsider and to fund these through the income-based, in other words, upload them. To date, we've not been very successful in those efforts. There are some areas like Ontario Works where 100% of the benefit was uploaded, but in other areas we continue to pay more than our fair share through the property tax base.
Thank you. Okay, I just want to remind members of council, we're dealing with the EX 11.1 and 11.26. Councillor Ford.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. So let me just find my questions I wrote down here. So, question specific to our staff in regards to the city building levy 0.26. So I was wondering, I know my office reached out to staff before council. There wasn't really an answer to this question. So I was just wondering if you have it now. Do we know how much it would cost the average taxpayer in the city of Toronto over the total of this 10.5%? Do we do any calculations to that?
Through the Speaker, the cumulative total of the existing city building levy as well as the proposed city building levy will total $326.
And that's per individual household?
For residential, that's correct.
Right. And in 1 year?
And that would be at the end of 2025.
And that's at the end of 2025. Now, particularly, is the calculations we have made to this on the tax rate staying steady? The average household calculation, is that steady or increasing over that time? And then property values as well.
It assumes assessment growth? Through the Speaker, it does assume assessment growth and inflation. And inflation.
Excellent. Now, particularly, my question to staff is more on kind of not the financial implications now, but more of a consultation process. I would summarize this as a very big policy change for the City of Toronto in terms of policy direction. Do we usually consult the public when making these types of big policy changes or items that come before council? Do we seek public consultation generally?
Through the Speaker, this particular item would be seen in the 2020 budget process, and you are familiar that there are consultation opportunities through that budget process where deputations can be made.
So the public still has a chance to have their say through the 2020 budget process?
That's correct.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just wanted to ask the city manager, the report does actually outline, as Councillor Holliday points out, that we are using property tax, which is the wrong tax pot, to fortify what are wealth redistribution services. As a result of the report, it asks that we contemplate a number of structural changes of our own, but also acknowledges that the real structural change that needs to happen is province-wide and maybe even including the federal government's involvement. Out of this report, what's the program on that front? I think residents need to hear what the plan is going forward, because we need to juxtapose it against our own proposal in item 26.
So if I can, through the Speaker, there is a program. We are working with our government relations staff and a number of senior leaders within the organization to engage in a strategy involving, as you mentioned, both the federal and provincial government. I think, as pointed out well in the report by EY, is that it's very hard to imagine, given certainly the capital pressure that we're under, that we're going to be able to shoulder all of the responsibility, because as you know, in the last 12 months, just the TTC alone, the state of good repair budget has gone from in the order of about $6 billion up towards about $33.5 billion. So there is a plan being put forward. It will be a multi-year plan. It will engage the federal and provincial government and the tools that they have to utilize to better address the present problems, and as well as the needs of a growing community. I just want to end with the comment that overall, from a tax perspective, I think people listening in right now, need to realize that of all the taxes that are collected, about 8% are in fact find their ways to a municipality. The other 92% are in the control of the federal and provincial government.
Right, and that stands in stark contrast to other nations and the way they include municipalities. If they're delivering wealth redistributive services, they rather than having to ask for this top-up of money or complex administrative agreements, they're given a measured access to those actual types of tax, income tax, et cetera. So is the plan, is this multi-year strategy to figure out which dollar amounts to ask for, or is there a concerted effort to say it's time to do a who does what exercise?
Through the Speaker, as you know, that was an exercise that was done a number of years ago, and I understand,
Right.
I believe University of Toronto, in fact, is engaging in their own effort to look at the who does what. You know, in essence, I think you're right. I think it is time, given the economy of Toronto and its importance to the country, that we do look at roles and responsibilities and who pays for what. That's really, in essence, I think what EY is saying in the report, and why I think it's important for us to engage in a conversation with the upper levels of government in who should be responsible for what service and how is that service paid for.
And in fact, I'm asking you a question that's really asking your viewpoint, perhaps not fair. But one could almost say that the who does what of 20 years ago actually resulted in actually putting us in the position of delivering things, and we're best placed to deliver. But that the step two of reviewing and then deciding which pot pays for these things really is yet to be done after 20 years of struggling along catch as catch can.
So,
is that not basically, step two just never happened?
That's correct. And I mean, you'll recall, and certainly, Councillor, you were well aware that in the 90s there was a point in time prior to the downloading that took place where there was a fixed formula that was being utilized to address operating costs related to TTC as well as capital costs. It was a shared responsibility. You'll recall there was a point where municipalities were engaged in pooling dollars to recognize the burden that Toronto does share. A lot of that went away. In fact, all of it did. And we were given some tools that we could utilize, but those tools comes with strings attached. We don't have the full access to the kind of revenue levers that one would hope we would.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cressy.
Thank you, Speaker. To the City Manager, did the EY report look at per capita spending in the City of Toronto?
Through the Speaker, yes, it did.
And did it find that in the last 4 years, per capita spending went down or up?
Councillor, in fact, it went down. It went from about $3,166 per person to $2,976 per person.
So can I put that in really plain language for a sec? The EY report found that we are spending as a city less per person today than we were 4 years ago.
That's correct, Councillor.
Thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you. Councillor Cole.
A question of staff, just in terms of this very, I think, telling statement you made, that of all the taxes collected from the residents of the City of Toronto, 92% go to the federal and provincial government. Is that correct?
Through the Speaker, that's correct. So when we say taxes, we're talking income tax, sales tax, all the range of taxes, including property tax that people pay, and the bulk of it does, in fact, go to the province and federal government.
So, and then only 8% of all the taxes collected come back to pay for city services like fire, police, sewer, roads, housing. So 8% of only come back to the city.
Yeah, I would just, when you mention sewer, as you well know, Councillor, we're on a rate system, but all the other services that you are property tax based.
Okay, then in terms of letting the public know about this, don't you think it might be helpful to put a line on a property tax bill saying, NB, take note that 92% of all the taxes you pay go to the federal and provincial government? Don't you think that would help get the people better informed and let the people know that this is the reality, and maybe have people contact their federal, provincial members saying, hey, you got 92%. Why not share and give some money back to the city?
Through the Speaker, we're happy to take whatever direction Council provides us. I just want to add to what you're saying, Councillor, that when you look at Census Metropolitan Toronto, which is Toronto, Peel, Halton, York, and part of Durham, when you look at the gross domestic product that's generated by that economic unit, it's equivalent to approximately Alberta, and it's equivalent to approximately Quebec. So the economic heartland of Canada is really in this very small geographic area. It's generating a lot of those revenues that the federal and provincial government are able to disperse to a number of services they're responsible for, and it's certainly part of the revenue that they utilize for transfer payments. So we're, in a nutshell, certainly paying more than our fair share.
And in the past, I know there's been all kinds of undertakings whereby the city has tried to talk to the federal provincial government about this inequity, basically. So perhaps maybe it's about time we started to engage the people of Toronto who are paying these taxes to contact and to advocate for fairness. So should we look at starting a communication information sharing campaign with the people of Toronto so they could know this? Because I'm sure most people in Toronto, the thing that they get that hits them the most is that property tax bill. The other taxes are sort of indirect, you might say, in many ways. So can we consider looking at an engagement campaign with the 3 million people of Toronto to say, hey, listen, we need to keep some money in Toronto to pay for our sewers, for our police, fire, ambulance, housing?
Through the Speaker, Councillor, I agree with you. I think as part of our budgeting process, it is our absolute goal to communicate our budget much more effectively, to engage much more effectively, and to your point about making sure that people understand the full spectrum of taxes they pay, what it is that we're actually allotted versus to what is found to be moving provincially and federally. That direction is more than reasonable.
So perhaps we should maybe look at what Jason Kenney is doing in Alberta, setting up a war room saying, hey, listen, look how hard done by the people of Alberta are. Maybe we need to say, hey, look at what the people of Toronto are paying, and 92% of this money generated by Toronto businesses and individuals is helping carry the rest of the country and the rest of the province.
So through the Speaker, I don't know if that's a question.
I'm wondering, should we be more aggressive in communicating the fact all this money is being taken out of Toronto every day?
Thank you. Yeah, I think it was just a comment. Okay.
If I can, through the Speaker, I think the very short and important answer is yes.
Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you very much. The question's to the city manager. If we had adopted the recommendation to increase the city building fund by 1% last year, what would that do to this year's budget? How much more revenue would we have coming in?
Through the Speaker, 32 million.
32 million.
Yeah.
So let's draw it back. What about if we introduced it, let's say, the first budget of the 2020 and 14 term. How much would that do to this budget this year?
Cumulatively through the speaker, I think it'd be an order of about $160, $170 million.
160 on an annual basis.
Right.
So if you add that all up, the cumulative total of the last 6 years is in the $300 million, $400 million range? Sorry, it's in the $300 million range, I suspect.
I believe so, yes. So could you just repeat your question, because
The cumulative impact on if we imposed a 1% tax increase going to the city building fund in 2014
yeah, it'd be around.
and implemented it every year, like what's outlined here.
Correct. Yeah, it'd be in excess of $300 million.
In excess of $300 million. Thank you. I don't mean, and I'm not trying to catch you on anything, because I think that this is indeed in order, and I've asked the clerk for clarification. But in October earlier this year, a similar motion was made that would have requested a report as part of the budget process on a 1% increase to the city building fund to go to public transit. Why is this in order now? I'm just curious, because it's an important point. We can't debate these items or introduce items of a similar nature. And I just want to see exactly how this one differs from the motion on item EX 9.1 a couple of months back that makes it so different that it's in order.
So if I can,
I believe it is in order, but I want to know why.
Right. I think if I can ask John or Yuli to look at the specifics of your question, which I think they're calling it up right now. If you could maybe hold his time so that we...
That is my last question too, and I can wait on a response. I think I may have been the last speaker. I do believe it's different. I just want to know how in the future, if we would vote against something a couple months later, how much needs to change. Yeah.
The clerk is going to go back and check.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we'll advise later in the meeting. Okay. Councillor Crawford.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just a question to the CFO, and I think it's clarification. When I heard there was a question earlier on about the average, the incremental average cost to the household with the levy, I think you'd mentioned that it was, I think, $326. I was under the impression that it was $280. It's not much difference, but I just wanted to get a clarification of if the 326 was correct.
Through the Speaker, the 280 is the incremental net change, where the 326 included the existing building levy for originally proposed.
Oh, okay, so that was the difference. Okay, I just want to make sure that clarification. With regard to the value-based report, a lot of efficiencies in there, and I know we're working on a lot of them for the upcoming budget cycle. And then beyond that, can you talk a bit, not about the actual efficiencies, which are important, but some of the bigger governance changes with regard to budget process, capital, multi-year budgeting? But can you, because I look at those as critically important as well as the efficiencies. So can you just talk about some of those changes that we're looking at implementing over time?
Through the Speaker, there are actually two main approaches that we are going to be taking that either clarify or change the way we do our capital projects on a go-forward basis. One of them is that we are going to ensure that procurement occurs on a 12-month cycle rather than just waiting for budget approval and then procuring once we have budget approval. The second piece is allowing us to go into multi-year contracts rather than procuring on an annual basis. And then the third piece is that once we introduce a 10-year capital plan that is approved by council, we will have projects that are in the plan and have been approved. And if we have the opportunity to accelerate projects, we'll have the flexibility of moving monies between the years to allow acceleration and delivery of projects sooner.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, that's it for the questions. Speakers, Councillor Holliday.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a motion, if I could just ask the clerks to put that up. Give folks a second to look at that. I want to thank staff for the work on this report and the consultants reflected on it. I found it contemplative in nature. And I guess the big question I posed this executive committee was, what I really wanted to think about is, why am I here? What am I doing as a councillor? What am I doing to serve my constituents? And the report has some really important language in there that we didn't talk a lot about. I try to fish it out in the questions, but it tells us two things. It tells us that the city is growing in size, and the growth of our services have not been in lockstep to that growth in the city. And in fact, some of them have shrunk in size or grown at a slower rate. So that really means we've been curtailing services. And I think that reflects that in the day-to-day type of calls I get as a councillor. I think back to my personal favorite in the summer is after the grass was cut, they said, you got to come out and look at this. And it was really long. It was like a hay field, and it was in the right-of-way along the road edge. It was embarrassing, really. And it was because we had cut back the budget. We don't even follow our own bylaws anymore on those type of services. And so I struggle when I read a report like this. I think it reflects what we've been doing over the last number of years, but it also raises the question about what it is that we do as a council and as a municipal government. And I asked about it in the questions. We get into this business of income transfer. And the report is quite clear. We should be taking very careful note as to whether or not the property tax base is the right place to go to fund income transfer. In fact, that may be the role of other orders of government. So they talk a little bit about childcare. And, as a council, we can make choices. We can try to deliver as much childcare as we can with the money that we've got and what the province gives us to fund that program and what we can do as a service provider. But we got into other things like direct delivery, and council took a position on, maybe we should do this service level instead. Maybe it costs more, but we think that's right. And I wonder if that's a roundabout way an income transfer program. We're going to talk a little while about housing. I mean, that's a huge program. That's the city subsidizing in various formats housing. And people rely on the government to help pay for those housing costs. But again, can we go back to the property tax base? Is that the right place to go? So I think about myself as somebody that oversees the delivery of services and deals with citizens on a daily basis and talk to people about affordability in the city. And I think about, what is the one thing that we control? We control the services and fees and taxes that we charge people. We control the property tax rate. We control the user fees. And we're set to raise those. But I want to make sure that I can stand before somebody before I go to and ask them for a tax increase, that I squeezed all of the service out of that money, that I've delivered them all of the things that they've asked me to deliver, that they're getting what they've paid for. And my concern has always been, and I've seen it before council, and it's reflected in this report, is that we get into these income transfer programs. A lot of people have different approaches to politics. Perhaps I'm a little bit more service-based as opposed to more along the scale of socialism. There's that way that we move income from one group to another. And I think you should ask yourself as a councillor, but maybe talk to your constituents, is that what they want of this government? Do they want us to get into the business of income transfer? And if we do that, are we accessing the money in the fairest way possible? As we heard from the city manager and what it says in the report is, the value of the houses doesn't necessarily grow with the economy. Only an income tax or a progressive tax can grow with the economy and thus address income inequities. Back to my motion, there were a number of recommendations in this report. And in particular, this particular recommendation around means testing, it goes in line with some work I've been doing from a modernization perspective and also some work that I've done on the audit committee. I see no reason why we shouldn't be moving ahead on this right away. It's about customer service. It's about qualifying people for city services, things that we've committed to delivering, and finding efficient ways to make sure that they're qualified for it. And at the end of the day, it's delivering the best and most services as we can with the money that we have. I hope you support that. It's literally taken out of this report as a recommendation from an external consultant. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have questions for you, Councillor Perks.
Certainly.
3 minutes.
Thank you. And I appreciate that you clarified a little bit at the end of your speech. So you've lifted this one thing of many out of the report because you think we should be means testing some of our programs.
Well, yes.
Which of our programs that we currently deliver, which is not means tested, do you want this to apply to?
Well, I'm just lifting it from page 38.
No, I understand.
The words are right there.
I'm not asking what page it was on. I'm
So
saying
the,
which city programs do you
Councillor
want
Perks,
to
allow
impose?
the councillor to
Well,
answer.
yeah, if I can clarify the motion further, it's about developing a process around that. So some of the other work I've done is around the modernization of our government and our public service. And one of the things that I've learned in my time as councillor and somewhat through that process is we do different techniques in different departments of the city to figure out what somebody's income is or what it is that qualifies them for the particular service. In fact, we talked about it at a government management committee last month. You know, you fill out a form to try to get a property tax rebate. So there was some discussion around, can we qualify people by accessing data from the federal government? We've got an agreement to do that. What I realize is, as an enterprise or as a service, we don't do this in a coordinated way across the government. So we may be better off to try to figure out a standardized process to qualify people in one single process to be more efficient, and then use that to base our policies on.
So that wasn't quite the question I asked you. I'm saying which of the programs that we do not means test for, is it your intention that we impose means testing?
I think we need to get that from a report, because what we want to have is a harmonized system across the city, and I think that's what the recommendation is of this particular report before us. I don't think I'm in a position to go into each individual program and unpack what it means to apply that process to it. That's the work of the staff, and that's what the consultant said here, is that we should be looking at doing these kinds of things. So it says here that we require council approval, and some further study is required, so that's what I've asked for, to come back and talk to us about that.
So, Councillor, I appreciate what you've said. However, let's not dance around the fact that you've plucked this one single thing out.
I
and
did.
It's clearly because you have something in mind. You didn't pluck anything else out. This one matters to you, and I want to know from you for the fourth time, which of the programs that we currently deliver without means testing is it your intention to impose mean testing and a barrier to service on?
Yeah, I can't comment on which of the programs there are, because I think I want the staff to go and figure that out. And it goes back to principles that were even mentioned by the Auditor General, as I mentioned, to look at these types of processes around this. So I think Council's going to have to figure out how it applies any policies or ideas coming forward from the staff.
Thank you. Councillor Wong Tam, clarification of the motion.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to just ask, with respect to perhaps grants that the City of Toronto provides to nonprofit service providers when they reach communities that they are able to reach local organizations, is the intention to ensure that those recipients who are receiving grants, and by way of receiving grants, the extension of those programs, is the intention to extend the means test to the recipients of those programs?
Yeah, I think the staff are going to have to figure out what this means to apply across the city. But the basic principle in the report is those that can afford to pay should, and those that cannot should receive those benefits. So having a better process around this is, I think, the spirit of what has been suggested in one of the items of the consultants going forward. And so my intent is to get council to go and ask to go and ask the staff to go and figure out how that's going to work. I think it's important. I think it's an easy thing that we can do, is set policies around this and access information streams maybe available from other governments or maybe even within our own government. We heard a lot about that in the Auditor General's report on housing. Finding ways to qualify people for the service, and maybe there's just a better way to do it across the services that we
That was a
provide.
very long answer. Maybe if you can shorten it up a bit. Who determines those tests? Is it council that will determine the test? Or are you asking staff to determine the test?
Staff
Who
has
will
to
do
go
the
sort all that.
evaluation?
Yeah, staff's going to have to sort all that out in the report. We're only simply asking to begin the journey on this process, just as it's outlined on page 38 of the E&Y report.
There are some services that are delivered unevenly across the city. So by way of example, snow clearing in the suburban areas, as you know, the neighborhoods, it takes place in every single sidewalk. Downtown Toronto does not receive that. Are you suggesting that we create a means test for those households in Scarborough, that if they can afford and they are able-bodied, they can do that work? They should actually not be receiving the city services?
That's not what this the section in the report is suggesting. We know that the city is built differently all over the place in physical configuration. In fact, I think there's even a piece in the rate-supported budget to try to charge people with larger parking lots a different rate for water consumption because, I don't know, I guess more water falls on a parking lot.
But your motion
This is
is
about,
your
this
motion is not that specific. It
well,
says
this is, again, it
creating
was
a
lifted from the
qualification
words and the opportunity of the report. I realize it makes some people uncomfortable, but, you know, I think we need to evolve our services and find ways to deal with people in an efficient manner.
Thank
and
you.
to qualify people for these services.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. Councillor Bala.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Like previous colleagues, just trying to understand if this is, if you're trying to have as a policy across the city, so using the example of the snow clearing. So we have a program to snow clear sidewalks for seniors. Do you want us to now be mean testing programs? All programs should come first with a policy that it should be means testing?
Well, I think it's more about adopting that principle that instead of giving away programs or services just universally and not having any regard to the ability to pay, this is suggesting that we look at the ability to pay for those things with the principle that those that can afford to pay will do so.
So you are asking us to have, as a principle, any program in the city to be means tested?
No, that's not what the motion says. The motion says to go back and investigate the ability to integrate these processes into certain things. The examples that were provided in the report was around discounted TTC fares and the welcome policy.
But those are means tested already, and so we are working, for example, on the human services integration. Is that where you're going to
perhaps
speed up that, to do that?
Perhaps this runs in parallel to that particular process. But what I do know is the Auditor General talked a little bit about not using the words mean testing, but using income verification processes, which is an extension of this larger process. I just think that we can innovate as a city. We can be a little bit more modern in how we deliver our government and find ways to qualify people for services and then use that information within the city.
Okay.
Instead of sending people around to different places.
So, Councillor, I'm just trying to understand, if you're asking us to modernize what we already have, or if you're trying to create a new principle on all programs. That's because I think a lot of people agree with the modernization, and there's lots of programs that we have in the city that are means tested that this council agreed, and we just want to understand if you're asking us to do a better job at that and and modernize and have a better customer service, or if you're saying that any programs should now start on the premises and with the principle that need to be means tested.
Well, if you evolve a system that contains this level of detail and this information, then council is going to be challenged what to do with it. So if we are able to identify individuals and what their income qualification level is, well then naturally the question is, when you deal with the programs is well, do we target it towards those individuals, or do we just sort of give it away to everybody without regard to the ability to pay? And, you know, those are going to be political decisions that we're going to have to make, but to have a system that at least qualifies us to make those decisions, I think advances the interest of the government forward. What we do with the information is going to be up to us, and we're going to be held accountable for that.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll, clarification of the motion.
Yes, I think I need more, in order to be able to vote for the motion, I need to know what you mean by consistent measures to determine who qualifies for support programs. And I guess what's making me nervous is what support programs are you talking about?
Well, that is lifted right from the report. This could include the adoption of consistent measures to determine who qualifies for the support. I said instead of support, I use programs to be a little bit more clear. Again, I can't predict how this is going to apply to all the city's programs. I think we have to go through the process of figuring out what information we can get and how we may be able to qualify people. Then it's going to go back to the design and the consideration of the program about who we give it to.
So currently, as a result, and there is a question coming here, Madam Speaker, as a result of adopting recommendations and updating systems according to the Auditor General's findings over the last several years, we now have measures that means test and update income mean tests so efficiently and in real time that we have complaints from constituents who say, I don't know why I asked for a raise because my childcare just doubled, my rent just doubled, I'm not even sure why I'm going to work, because every single thing means that rent geared to income goes up so fast, I'm 2 steps forward, 4 steps back. That's how efficient the system is. So while I appreciate that's what EY said, are you not hearing those same concerns?
Well, yeah, but you look at those in each in its individual context, and maybe the overall observation is sometimes in the city one hand doesn't talk to the other, and so that level of detail or that efficient service isn't available to qualify somebody else for a different program. So all this goes back to is the idea that if we're a smart enterprise organization and we qualify somebody somewhere for something, we've used a detailed process, why not leverage that process and information to qualify them in other places? Again, it will go back to council with public policy discussions as to whether or not we use that qualification to deliver a service or if we just give it away. But those are political questions some of my colleagues here have tried to bring into the debate. I'm going back to more of a systematic approach.
So,
can we do this better?
So that's the systematic approach that I'm asking about, whether or not you're aware of it. I guess what it is yes, it's nice to have this report, but I don't always agree with every page in it. Are you aware in making this motion that we have done nothing but coordinate these systems for the last decade, such that a caseworker now can get you your welcome letter that gets you into recreation, can get you your fare pass that gets you on the TTC system, and is tracking in real time your earnings slip should you earn, so that if you're on ODSP or OW and you're suddenly in better circumstances, we can respond like that.
I think we can take it further.
Okay, thank you. Before we continue to the speakers, Councillor Layton. Councillor Layton, earlier in the debate, Councillor Layton asked whether a vote on item EX 11.26 is an opening of a lost motion voted on under EX 9.1 in October. The principle behind the reopening rule is that City Council should not be placed in the same circumstances on a matter within a 12-month period without a 2/3 vote to reopen. In my view, the circumstances before us today are different than the ones facing Council in October, when it debated the city's transit options. Among other things, the recommendation in EX 11.26 is broader in scope than Councillor Layton's previous motion. Accordingly, I'm ruling that item EX 11.26 is in order. That's to your response. Thank you. Councillor Crawford.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. First of all, I want to thank staff, our city staff, and Ernst & Young for the report that they have provided on the value-based report. It's an incredibly important document from my perspective, and again, I want to thank the province for supporting that document. Extending the City Building Fund and implementing the value-based report is a vital step to address the imminent needs of a rapidly growing and overburdened city for all Torontonians. And for this reason that I support Mayor Tory in the decision that he made to bring forward the city building levy. And I know for a fact that this was a difficult decision. It was not made lightly for the future of this city. And I want to thank the Mayor, of course, for his leadership on this. As Budget Chair, this has not been an easy decision for me either. And you know what? Nor should it have been. Increasing the city building fund by 1%, 1.5% over the next 5 years is a short-term measure that we have seen will raise over $6 billion of dedicated funds to improve our existing transit system in need of over $33 billion over the next number of years, along with affordable housing. It is part of a longer-term strategy to both maintain and increase access to opportunities so that Toronto can continue to grow as one of the greatest cities in this world. But as Budget Chief, it is my responsibility that there is a sustainable long-term fiscal plan in place that is built upon identified efficiencies in city government to safeguard every tax dollar. That's been the focus in my role over the last 5 years. And I have been satisfied that each and every year we have been working towards finding efficiencies. Not everything. The work will continue, and the work will continue in this year and years forward. But I'm also aware of the perception that this is another tax grab. It is not. But I'm more keenly aware of the reality. And when you look at what we have done over the last 5 years in finding efficiencies, we have found over $800 million of efficiencies over the last 5 budgets. We have looked at modernization. We've looked at doing things differently. Look at Create TO. We've put that together to consolidate all of our real estate services. We now have an investment board that we never had, and it now manages our resources much better, and the returns, of course, are much better. And we look at some of the challenges that we've had in our operating budget and the increases that have been made to that impact service. 2 years ago, we had a $100 million problem with the land transfer tax. We managed to balance the budget without raising taxes beyond 2%, and we kept all the services. You're looking at this budget year. We're going to be having some challenges like we do every year. We have now heard with the police budget a 3.9% increase so we can have more officers, 3.5% increase in TTC so we can have more bus routes. And of course, we've already had the conversation about our responsibilities to Toronto community housing. Now, with all of those challenges, this year, as we do every year, we'll keep the cost of the 2% increase in taxes low. That is my commitment to this council. But the city is growing at a rate of over 60,000 to 70,000 residents a year. We have an economy the size of a province. And this is where the value-based outcome review conducted by Ernst & Young, I think, sheds an incredibly harsh light on the true fiscal challenges and risks Toronto is facing, while at the same time highlighting the opportunity for fiscal remedies. We've talked about the $50 million in efficiencies this year, and of course there will be more in years past. But what's critically important in this document are the governance changes, and specifically the governance changes that will impact the budget. We do need to start acting like a city our size and not a small municipality. So when you're looking at some of the measures that will be instituted, when we're looking at going towards multi-year budgeting, and we've attempted to do this many years over, we will be actually achieving that. When you're looking at recasting our capital plan, these are some of the measures that I think will bring us to where we need to get as a responsible city. The city building levy extension is going to raise over $6 billion to invest directly in our transit system, including subway, streetcars, street improvements, and signal upgrades, and of course, affordable housing. Although the city's ability to generate revenue is unfortunately extremely limited, from this position of strength, we can continue to lobby other municipalities and governments for innovative partnerships and fair funding solutions. Inaction is not an option here, and I recognize that the city building levy will have a burden on some residents in the city, but I do believe it is the right thing to do to build up our city and to protect our prosperity. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cressy.
Well, thank you, Speaker. I'll keep my remarks specific to the increase to the city building fund and the corresponding increase to property taxes to pay for it. And I want to talk to the substance of it, and I want to recognize and commend leadership when I see it. I think it's fair to say that, in my experience, over the last 5 years, cracks have emerged in our city and increasingly become more visible in our city. I wait longer to get on the 505 bus every single day. Takes me longer every day to get on the bus. It should be a streetcar, but we don't have enough of them there. Our residents are waiting longer to get on the bus and the streetcar. It's taking longer to find your space on a waiting list for affordable housing and for childcare. And when you look at our service standards, we're not maintaining our parks the same way we used to. Those are visible cracks. That is the reality that I face in our city, and that's the reality my constituents tell me they experience in our city. So why is that happening? Well, the Ernst & Young report was pretty clear. In the last 4 years, the amount of money we spend per person in the city has gone down, not up. We are spending less per person in the city today than we were 4 years ago. And the fact is, for 9 straight years, we have spent less, not more, per person in the city. So as our population grows, we spend less. And the result are cracks. And so after 9 years, and many years of being told that the solution is more so-called efficiencies and savings, today we turn a big corner. And we turn a big corner across the political spectrum, from left to right, by recognizing that to build a strong city, you actually have to invest in it. And so that's a big decision to make. That's a big corner to turn. And I want to commend leadership when I see it. And in that instance, I want to recognize and commend Mayor Tory and our budget chief, Councillor Crawford. It is never easy in politics to raise taxes. Some people say it's bad politics. I believe that leadership is where you lead public opinion rather than follow it. You articulate a vision. You campaign on it. You go out and make the public case for it, and you bring the public with you. That's leadership. It's not campaigning out of fear. It's campaigning based on hope and a vision. And so to Mayor Tory and Budget Chief Crawford, I say well done to you both. Now, I'll tell you, I grew up playing football. And in football, you congratulate the person who gets over the finish line. You congratulate the person who scores a touchdown. But you never forget your blockers. You thank your blockers for getting you in the end zone. And so for 5 years, I've been at City Council, and each and every year, at every budget debate, members of this council have made the case that we're about to vote on here today. And so I think our blockers deserve some recognition too, and I'm sure the mayor will also recognize his blockers on this. And that's Councillor Perks and Councillor Carroll and Layton and Fletcher and others. It's the organizations who have endlessly come and deputed every single year at Budget Committee to say we need to do just this. It's people like Social Planning Toronto, the Toronto Environmental Alliance, Progress Toronto. It's every year I host a budget town hall, a joint one with Councillor Layton, and every year we have a couple hundred people come up who tell us, please raise my taxes. In fact, I campaigned in the last 2 elections on raising property taxes because my constituents told me cracks have emerged. And so if the purpose of government, the fundamental purpose of government is to tax and spend and regulate, and you tax and spend and regulate in order to build a strong, prosperous, livable, and affordable city, we today turn a corner, and we recognize that to build that city we want, that affordable city, that livable city, that prosperous city, that you actually have to invest in it. And so well done. To Mayor Tory, kudos to you. And to this chamber, we turn a corner. Politically, across the spectrum, we turn a corner. And so to those who scored the touchdown and the blockers who got us over the finish line, I say well done. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a motion that relates to item number 1, which is that the City Council requests the City Manager to report back through the Executive Committee in the 4th quarter of 2020 on a coordinated council-wide strategy for communicating to both intergovernmental partners and to community members the need for Toronto to have a fully mature funding model that includes access to taxes that are better aligned to wealth redistributive services that are delivered municipally. Madam Speaker, I move this motion because I think the community needs something that is the counter to the courageous move that Mayor Tory took in saying that in the short term, we simply need a stronger city building levy to continue the work that the city badly needs. They need to hear that we're also working on that piece that is highlighted within the first 2 pages of EY. I don't agree with everything in this report. They had 12 weeks to do the report. 12 weeks. I'd ask any newly elected councillor, because their memories will be the most fresh, how much did you know about every nook and cranny of this city and your office team at the end of 12 weeks? So EY did their best, but I don't think, in my comment on Councillor Holliday's motion, I don't think they realize how very much we have done to make consistent the measure that makes it such that in real time we're beginning to know exactly what people's income circumstances are when they're on a support program. It almost disincentivizes bettering your circumstances, because you wonder, do I lose my childcare subsidy? If I stay in this job for 1 more year, am I off the books? And then what do I do? Do I latchkey this kid? Those are the types of decisions that are happening because our system is now operating so well. But at the same time, we've countered that by centralizing, making sure that they know through a case manager everything that they are qualified for and can make it possible. So those are my comments. That's why I'm not going to be able to support Councillor Holliday's motion. It makes me a little nervous. But we do need a strategy. We've got to have a mature funding model. I've said this before. There are cities in North America, our size and larger, who have access to a penny on the dollar sales tax, and it runs the operation, the daily operation of their transit system. There are cities in North America that through payroll deduction have access to a measured portion of income tax so that they can use that to pay for their wealth redistributive social programs. And the beauty of that is far more inexpensive than a road toll to collect. You begin to collect those regional dollars that deal with such statistics as the fact that Toronto has 90% of the social housing for the GTA. That statistic alone tells you that we have an extra assignment and we are delivering it on behalf of the entire GTA. 90%. For all the progress they've made in the GTA, there is now a social housing complex somewhere in Mississauga. There is one in Brampton. There are a couple in Durham region. We are still housing 90% of the people who need to live on rent geared to income, lowest income forms of social housing. And so we have all of the challenges that go with that. And all of it should be coming out of an income tax pot. Those who are robustly taking part in today's income, not our seniors on fixed income who are suddenly finding themselves shocked and surprised at their twilight years to be paying $700 a month in property tax, but those who are taking the most benefit in our thriving economy in Toronto should be taking care of others. And the only way to do that is to change the pot we're taking those dollars from, to be using the right pot. EY has pointed it out to us in their report, and every other consultant who's ever looked at it has highlighted it. Every city manager who's ever taken that chair, the first thing they say is, what are we doing giving all these social programs? Nothing but the picket fence tax. We know we need to do this. The reason I say council-wide strategy and wrapping up, Madam Speaker, is that strategy, I want the city manager to wrap his head around while he's writing that report that it needs to be a communication strategy that is uniform, coming from intergovernmental staff, coming from the mayor, and coming from every councillor in this chamber. We all need to be on the same song sheet if we're going to make a change in this regard. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Bradford.
Thanks very much, Madam Speaker. I'd like to start by thanking the Mayor and our Budget Chief for their leadership on this file. It certainly hasn't been, as others have noted, conversations about property tax increases, whatever you want to call that, city building levy, etc., are always challenging. And I know in Beaches East York, we have a wide range and diversity of views on the matter. But what everybody generally agrees is that we have significant challenges with transit in this city. We have significant challenges with housing in Toronto. And that impacts people's day-to-day lives, and it impacts their children, and it impacts their parents and the entire families. And we know that those challenges make it harder and harder and less livable in the city of Toronto. As one of the younger members on council, I think about it from a generational lens. I think about the challenges of some of my peers, some of my friends right now trying to find a place in Toronto's housing market. The long commutes across the 688 square kilometers of this city to get to where they need to go, and how that continues to be challenged by the state of our transit system, and just all of the pressures and the stress that have been put on that, frankly, from probably not enough investment over the past number of decades. And that doesn't land with any one person or government in particular, but rather it's a challenge that touches all three branches of government. Yesterday, we were at the TTC Commission, and we were talking about the $25.7 billion unfunded in our capital improvement plan. That is streetcars, that is vehicles for line 1 and 2, that is state of good repair at our transit stations, that is expansion at Yonge and Bloor. We're not even talking about new line expansion to grow the system and the network that we desperately need in this city. Later this afternoon, we're going to be talking about our ambitious new housing plan, which I hope all of us are supporting. But in that, it contemplates and recommends and provides a path forward to providing housing for 340,000 people, providing subsidy for 340,000 households in this city. That's important. That's stuff that we have to do, and it comes with a cost. And I think now more than ever, we actually need to invest more in Toronto, not less. And when it's on a dedicated revenue tool, when people understand that these dollars, they're hard-earned dollars, and everyone's budgets are tight, but they are going to things that are tangible. They are going to things that they can see and they can feel and will make a difference in their lives. On the transit and on the housing file, I think that's a responsible thing to do. It also gives us the ability, our autonomy here as Toronto City Councillors, to turn the screws on the province and the feds. I think we need a new deal for cities when we're looking at these big infrastructure projects. When we talk about the $2.1 billion that Toronto pays in operating for the TTC, the province, with cuts to the gas tax, is only bringing $90 million to the table. It's less than 4%. And I think that given the importance of our system and all the heavy lifting that the TTC does in Toronto, we need the province to step up and do more. And I echo the same for the federal government that has long shied away from doing anything on the operating side of the equation, but is so important for the vitality, not only of Toronto, but the entire region, the province, and the country. So we're doing the work that we need to do. I think it puts us in a better position to go to the table with those levels of government. I think people understand the need and appreciate the intensity in which we have to pursue this and make these investments right now. And I'm happy to support it. I appreciate the leadership from this council and our mayor on this file. And now's the time to do more, not less. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor McKelvey to speak.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Every day we see the consequences of our underfunded 7-year-old transit system. We see delays, we see breakdowns, we even sometimes see fires on the tracks and the tunnels. The TTC is on life support, and we need to invest. We are also aware of the housing crisis in the City of Toronto, with apartment rents reaching, on single bedrooms reaching $2,000 a month. Affordable housing is desperately needed. I love my children, but I don't want them to live at home forever. I want them to have the ability to move out, to start a family, and to afford rent on their own apartments. And my job as councillor is to be open and honest about the scale of investment that is needed to keep our public services running. There's just 14 days left in this decade, a decade which saw no higher order transit built in Scarborough, a decade which saw the bill for our state of good repair soar, and a decade which saw rent prices increase in the City of Toronto. So I'd really like to thank Mayor Tory and Councillor Crawford for being bold in increasing the city building levy. I'm hopeful that the 20s will be known as the decade that we built transit in Scarborough, that we built affordable housing in the City of Toronto, and that we tackled our state of good repair backlog. Thank you again for your leadership, and I'm hopeful that we will make that bold step of increasing our city building levy today.
Thank you, Councillor McKelvey. Councillor Cole is next.
Yeah, thank you. I just...
One second. You have a motion, Councillor Cole. I believe it's not
yeah.
ready.
It's not ready?
Yeah, it's not ready. So I'm going to stop your time, and we will go on. Councillor Fletcher, are you ready to go?
Speaker.
Okay, Councillor Fletcher, I'll start the time over again.
Thank you. I don't want to take too long. I just want to say how important this is to be doing this, and I'm very much struck by Councillor McKelvey's. This is the last 14 days in this decade, and what have we been able to accomplish on major things? And we've moved the yardstick so much on housing, but transit is so difficult because there have been so many different plans, and we are still dealing with changes that were made many years ago, and yet nothing has been built. So that is the saddest part to me. But having a fund that Torontonians know is a dedicated fund, to me, is very important. And I want to just go back to the vehicle tax. We had a $60 a year. If you're driving a car, you're paying $60 a year. There was a campaign, a mayoral campaign, saying that's terrible. You should not have to pay, get rid of that $60, etc. I think our mistake with the $60 vehicle tax was not being clear to Torontonians that $60 that you're paying will go to transportation. I'm not going to say transit. I'm going to say the roads that you're driving on every day. We will invest that in infrastructure you use. That message was never clear. And so it fell under attack because it looked like that would be going out to just do anything in the city, not a dedicated fund. The next one up that we were very bold to undertake was the tolls. As a council, and again, I'm going to say to the mayor, thank you for advancing that in the way that you did. We hit the rocks where the provincial government would not allow us to toll the Gardner. And when we look in these reports, we realize that good half of the people that are on that are from outside. And if you're living in the city, you don't mind, you should not mind, paying to go on an expedited passageway above the city. So unfortunately, that didn't come to pass. That would have been a lot of money. So now we have a second fund that we're building on one that we started. I do not recall this fuss when we initiated the Scarborough Subway and said, we will have a Scarborough Subway building fund that everybody across the city will pay for. Whether you live in Ward 1 in North Etobicoke, whether you live in Regent Park, whether you live in your ward, Madam Deputy Speaker, then that is, you're all paying for the Scarborough Subway. We did not have a fuss. So I do not understand this big fuss that's coming from parts of the public about this dedicated fund. To expedite transit, to be able to pay for housing while we marshal the forces of those governments that have the ability to collect not property tax, but income tax. So I wholeheartedly support this. I want to thank the budget chief. I want to thank the mayor because I know you're getting a lot of heat. But we just keep trying to find some ways to bring in funds that can be dedicated where the public can see, here's how we spent that extra money. And they know that we were prudent with those tax dollars. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Is Councillor Cole's motion ready? Okay, Councillor Cole, clerks are ready for you to read your motion.
Just looking for it up on the screen. I move that City Council requests that the city manager, when implementing the 2020 city building levy, to include a light item in the city property tax bill that clearly indicates that 92% of all taxes paid by Toronto residents are collected by the federal and provincial government, and only 8% is collected by the City of Toronto to pay for city services and programs. Madam Chair, this is really an add-on to your motion, Councillor Carroll's motion, which really asks for a comprehensive, all-encompassing strategy by City of Toronto staff and officials to try to get the public on side, to make them understand where their tax dollars are going. Not only their property tax dollars, but their income tax, their commercial property taxes, all their HST, GST, all these taxes, where they're going. And I think the comments made here today are all bang on in terms of the fact is we, as a city, have always had, and cities have always had problems trying to get a share of the tax pie. Yet we provide some of the most significant services. So I would think in the past, and this has been done, I've been here when, remember, Dale Richmond, Don Richmond, all these great icons of the City of Toronto wrote reports to the federal government, the provincial government, saying there was an inequity here about the amount of taxes people in Toronto pay and what they get back. I think what is really missing is engaging and getting the public to understand this very complex tax system and the very complex system of responsibility. Because as you know, it's quite clear, first of all, we are a creature of the province. I mean, fundamentally, we're not going to change that, it seems. We're going back in the opposite direction. So the public really, in their busy lives, doesn't really have an opportunity to understand all these complexities of who is financially responsible, who collects taxes, who does what, all these ways of trying to explain this. But I think what's been missing over the years is this engagement of the public so they can understand, because they're paying the bill. Yet they're not getting money back, and the money is not staying in Toronto to provide for these critical services. So we have to look at maybe opening up a new front here. You know, there's been Brexit, there's been Wexit, how about Torexit? That we start saying that we need to bring attention to this. That's all I'm trying to do by referring to that. The public doesn't have time to understand these complex things. So we've got to make a concerted effort to engage the public, because if they're not with us, we ain't going to get anything. Because it's so easy, whether you're the federal or provincial government, if you have a one-off tax, it's so easy to attack. Whether it's the toll, whether it's a special levy, they're so easy to attack, they get shot down because remember, there's so many members, federal and provincial, from outside of Toronto. And so you go there, where I go, I'm representing Toronto, yeah, big deal. Well, Toronto's got all this money, and they basically make it very difficult to the local MPPs or MPs to advocate for Toronto, because they always think, well, Toronto's full of all this money. But they don't realize, like Councillor Bilal said, 90% of the social housing is provided in the City of Toronto. So people come from all over to try and get housing jobs. And people don't really appreciate, outside of Toronto, how expensive it is to live in this city. What you pay for childcare, what you pay for transportation. God forbid, the average one-bedroom apartment now is $2,200 a month. I mean, you could rent a mansion in Thunder Bay for that. They don't understand that reality. So we need to support what the mayor is doing and what the budget chief is doing. They've been very heroic in their attempts to bring forth some new revenue tools, but we are just going to go nowhere unless we break through to get the public to understand they're paying all these tax dollars, and only 8% is staying in Toronto. We've got to get the public to ask, why is 92% leaving the city? Unless the public starts asking that question, we aren't going to get the resources we need to provide for the housing, the transit, the police, fire, sewers, ambulance, etc. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of the item. I want to thank the Mayor for his leadership, and I know it's been mentioned, but I think it has to be reinforced. I want to thank the Budget Chief, Councillor Crawford, and of course the City Manager and staff and so on in terms of bringing forward the information as part of the report, but helping us to understand what it is that we're trying to do. There was a time when we were all about zeros in the council chamber. I think the first term, the first mayor, indicated that there would be no increases with respect to taxes. I think we're still suffering from that or those decisions of the day. And in fact, people are always asking us to do more. The question is, how do we do more to address the issue around transit, housing, and all the things that we have to do in this city to make things better because people are demanding better services and so on. I think it's really important for us to ensure that we invest in our cities, invest in its growth, not for us, but for the generation that is to come. And clearly we will benefit as well as part of this particular process because we're making tough and difficult decisions. It's always difficult when you ask people to contribute more. And I realize the media and others will say, you know, this mayor made a promise during the election, and councillors, you didn't talk about tax increase and so on. The reality is, in terms of making informed decisions with facts and with information, allows us to form our position of the day and as part of the process, because people want more, want better. Because the other option is to give less based on a demand and a city that's growing. We're the fastest growing city in North America. There's huge demand. Councillor Balau has expressed continuously through a council meeting about the housing issues and what we're trying to do there. We have to pay for it somehow. The other levels of government are not simply going to open their pocketbooks and say, come with your wheelbarrow and take as much as you need to grow the city because we have a whole bunch of money that it's available to you. That is not the case. And so what are we talking about? We're talking about $46 per year over the 6-year period. And is that something that we don't want to do to grow and invest in our city? I'd submit to you, Madam Speaker, that it is something that we should do, we must do, to grow the city's ability to build based on its need and its desire for its citizens. This requires us to certainly make difficult decisions, which we are doing here today. We're ensuring that the funds are dedicated to build on the future, to build a greater future for this city and the generation to come. I realize there'll be those who will say I'm affected and challenged. We have some mechanism to help residents in terms of a situation where it is difficult for them. We have some of those mechanisms. But I do think it's important for us to invest in the future of this city because other cities around the world are doing it. And if we are competing with other cities around the world where they're building better infrastructure, where they're building better transit, where they're putting more affordable housing in place, then we ought to look at the future in terms of where we want the city to grow. So for those reasons, Speaker, that the total sum over the course of the 6-year period is $326 that we're investing in our city. I would dare say that this city warrants that investment, and I'm asking my residents to understand that while we're making these difficult decisions, It's in their best interest and the best interest for all Torontonians. And again, I want to commend the mayor on his leadership and the budget chief and his leadership and the city staff for providing us with great information to help us to make this tough decision, which is in the best interest of all citizens and visitors, of course.
Thank you. Councillor Bailao.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to start by thanking the provincial government by paying for this study that is in front of us. Because I'm hoping that this study is the beginning of a conversation and not a study to be ignored by them as well. As I read it, there's one big fact coming out of this study, is that there's a huge mismatch between the ambition of us as a city and our finances. There's a huge mismatch. And if we want to continue to be ambitious, to be the economic engine of this province and this country, if you want to continue to have the ambition of attracting jobs and attracting investment, if you want to have the ambition of continue to move and have good public transit, and if we have the ambition of housing people in a safe place in the city, and have our roads in good conditions, and have our parks in good conditions, if that is our ambition as a city, we need to have a conversation about the finances of this city. And because as the report states, we're like a province. There's probably some provinces that don't have the complexities that we have in front of us. And so I think what we're doing here today with the proposal that the mayor has in front of us is acknowledging that with the very, very limited tools that we have, we are not giving up on our ambition. We are investing on our ambition as a city, but there's a clear understanding that we need the different tools. And that's why I believe and I hope that this is the beginning of a conversation. That this is the beginning of a conversation with an order of government that has demonstrated that is willing to make the tough decisions, that is willing to put forward proposals that are going to bring the funds in here, but we need to continue the conversation about how do we grow this city, how do we continue the investments in this city, so that they can continue, to be honest with you, to collect a lot of more taxes. You know, when you talk about 92% of taxes going to other orders of government, and 8% coming to us, a lot of them come because of the healthy city that we have, because the economic activity that is done in here. So if they still want to have that strong, robust city and economic center, we need to understand that we need a new deal for cities, like some of my colleagues already said in here, and we need to understand that we need to protect the health and the quality of life in the city. So I stand today to thank the mayor and thank the budget chief and my colleagues for what is in front of us, because it's not easy. I think all of us continue to make sure that we're governing the city in the most effective and efficient way, but making sure that once we've done that, and the report clearly shows that there has been savings, that the growth, that we've actually responded to growth in this city with the efficiencies in our budget, but it's a time to invest. It's a time to invest in the city to make sure that we continue to grow and to have a healthy city. And so I support the proposal in front of us, but I do hope and I'm looking forward for this to be the beginning of a conversation in our relationship with our city, with our province, and with our country as well.
Thank you. Councillor Layton to speak.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I just want to say three quick things, and in those 3 points, give some thanks to, I think, people that deserve it in the room. One, that this move to increase the city building fund is necessary. Two, that it's long overdue. And three, that more will be needed if we are to achieve our goals of a city. First, this is necessary. Year over year, we've been told by our city manager, by our CFOs, that we're on a course to an iceberg. that if we continue down this path, there's going to come a point in time where we can't deliver the level of services we need, and we've promised the residents of Toronto, and in fact, the level of service will begin to suffer. Councillor Cressy called it the cracks that were forming. So I'd like to thank those city managers, in particular those that helped produce the long-term financial plan for the city, because it illustrated this. We got this last year. It really did highlight this. And for those that have helped over the years move the dial by continuing to raise this issue, those from outside the chamber that came to budget hearings and tried to show us some light, and those from inside the chamber. Sometimes, through bringing this to light, or as we were trying to do it, we were ridiculed for taking that position. In the press, during elections, and even on the floor of council. For that, I would like to show my deepest gratitude to some of my colleagues that have continued this fight for so long. But it's a challenge to go out there and push back against some of the assumptions that are made about governments in general, not just municipal governments, but people like to pick on us on occasion. It's a challenge to go out there and say, you know what, we've done the work to try to identify greater efficiencies. And as our budget chief said, and I've been so honored to serve on the budget committee because of some of the efficiencies that have been found. Hundreds of millions of dollars, year over year. The amount of efficiencies that we've found in the last 2 terms of government far outweighs this increase. But still, it can be difficult to challenge people's assumptions, particularly if they're residents who you'd like to attract their vote during an election. And that's why I'd like to say, give my thanks and show my gratitude to the mayor for standing up and explaining that this needs to be done at this point in time. I've been reading some of the emails that have been coming to his office, and I don't think they're fair. To be honest, I just don't think they're fair. They're not grounded in facts. And maybe that's a problem of us treating this communication with our residents too simply and trying to communicate complex issues with simple language. But we've been trying for years, and this is long overdue. If you haven't read the long-term financial plan recently, please look at it. Just flip through the graphs. They illustrate an incredible picture of how the city has relied too much on one source of revenue and not enough on a more consistent source of revenue. And that there is room. That in a city of Toronto, we are not overtaxing our residents. Compared to other municipalities in the GTA, we are actually lower than that. And there is room to build and invest in our city. Now, the one people that I guess have known this are all the consultants we've hired to year over year tell us we're doing a good job. KPMG, now Ernst & Young, have all said there might be some areas to find some money here and there, but overall, you're doing well in managing the city's money. And we heard that if we had done this at the beginning of the last term, $300 million, we could have paid for part of a transit line had we taken earlier action. But this can't stop here. We are going to need to look for other revenue tools in this budget and beyond if we're going to meet the billions in unfunded capital, the billions in state of good repair, and the other issues that will no doubt arise as our city continues to change and grow. So just finally, another thanks to our mayor and our city manager for bringing this forward and putting a case to the residents of Toronto that this is necessary.
Thank you. Councillor Perks to speak.
Thank you, Speaker. It is my hope, my wish actually, that today marks a turning point in the way Torontonians talk about the city that we build together. For, I don't know, a decade, longer than that, we've had a toxic conversation about the shape of the City of Toronto and certain very basic truths about how this city functions have been hidden. The fact of the matter is that taxes pay for civilization and they're the pathway to Toronto's success. That's always been true. It's always been true that when we buy services together, we save money. Imagine if you had to pay for your own private security company to look after safety and security on your city block, or if you had to go out and contract with a private company to be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to put out a fire if one started in your home. Or if you had to pay to get water from Lake Ontario treated and to your house by yourself. Or any of the other services that we buy together. No one could afford to live in a society that was designed that way. We can only afford the quality of life that we experience and enjoy, all the benefits of the City of Toronto, because we do so many things together, because we pay taxes. Taxes are the price of living in Toronto. And yet, anyone who has said that in the last decade has been mocked, belittled, attacked, called names, and generally been made to feel that they are doing something wrong. Today is a victory, but it is a victory for all those people in the City of Toronto who have stood up to that abuse and mockery. I think particularly of the people of the City of Toronto who showed up not once, but twice to depute over a 24-hour period to tell Toronto City Council that you can't efficiency your way into a better city, that the idea of trying to cut led to poverty, not to success. I'm talking, of course, about all those hundreds of people who came and deputed for 24 hours about the KPMG Service Efficiency Report, and all of the people who since then have talked around the family dinner table, when they're out having a coffee with people from work, or in their congregation, or in their bridge club, or whatever it was. Everyone in the City of Toronto who in the last 10 years has said to anyone else in the City of Toronto, we need to pay to be a great city. I'm happy to pay more in property taxes. This is your day. This is the day when the movement that you have been patiently part of, building and building and building over the last decade, to say, no, no, the argument that taxes are some kind of burden is wrong. Taxes are not a burden. Taxes are the thing we do together to build a future and a present for ourselves and our families. Congratulations to everyone who's spoken up. On a final note, when I said I hope this is the beginning, a turning point in the conversation, we have to acknowledge that this is not the end of this conversation. This raises a certain amount of money, around $6 billion, but we know that on transit alone, we have at least a $25 billion problem, and with housing, probably another $24 billion problem. So out of that $50 billion, we now know where 6 comes from. The conversation has to continue. Toronto is one of the rare cities with 3 million population who does not have access to real tools for redistributive programs like the sales tax or the income tax. We have to have that conversation. Councillor Layton mentioned that city managers have been telling us this for years. I remember in 2003, the City of Toronto came up with a checklist for success of the things we had to do. We had to get the federal government, provincial government to the table on housing. There was a whole list. And on that list was getting a share of the sales tax. It is time for us to make sure that the programs that we need to make Toronto succeed are properly funded. Today is the beginning of that journey. I hope you'll join me in the rest of the journey.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not going to speak for long. I am supporting the mayor's initiatives. He has a mandate to move forward with two particular items, housing, which he talked about during the election, and transit, and I recognize that those things can't be fully funded with the resources that we have. I find it very interesting that the individuals who I refer to as the tax counselors in this room, the taxaholics, think this is a day to celebrate and the taps are going to get turned on and this is going to be the first in many initiatives where we're going to celebrate, where we go and tell the people that they have to pay more. We also have a report in here that says we can find efficiencies and we can find savings. Let's not forget that. There are efficiencies to be found in this city. That's our job. You look at the head count in this place, it's massive. You look at middle management, it could use some trimming. The number of employees that we have and are stunning. I mean, I've just, I've had some discussions with the mayor, and I'll just bring up one example. We have, do you know how many people we have working in the IT department? Over 1,000 people working in the IT department. Do you think we need all those people? I don't think so. Do you think we could get by with fewer? I mean, I just hear a councillor laughing because he thinks that 1,000 people working in the IT department is okay. Well, I would say that most of the residents in the city of Toronto, or at least most of my residents, would shake their head and say, how come you need 1,000 people working in the IT department? Just as one example, and there are more. This isn't, in terms of finding efficiencies, in terms of finding savings, in terms of looking at a budget and saying, where can we save the taxpayers the burden of having to pay extra money? And I've looked at the emails too. I've seen emails from seniors who say it's tough to make a go of it, from young families who can't afford to live in this city. It seems to me most of the members of this council that I've heard from speaking today are ignoring those people. I'm not going to ignore those people. I'm going to listen to those people.
Point of personal privilege, Councillor Carroll.
Madam Speaker, I waded through being called a taxaholic, along with all my colleagues. I waded through intimating that suddenly the Budget Committee is going to stop looking for efficiencies annually, and then we got to the councillor's last comment that we simply don't care. And that I have to rise on a point of personal privilege on behalf of every single member of this chamber who never, ever, ever take raising taxes lightly. And so to use that rhetoric is simply that rhetoric, and it's not useful in this discussion. I ask you to rule on the tone.
Madam Chair, I didn't refer to any specific councillors. I didn't refer to all of council.
Yeah,
I said
yes,
some.
just a
I
moment.
said there are some councillors in their speeches.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Minawang, can you just retract that comment, please?
Which one?
The last comment that you made.
Which was what?
About that there are councillors that don't care.
Okay, I'll retract that comment and I'll say there are many councillors in this chamber who actually, from their speeches, seem to me celebrate the idea that we're raising taxes.
Yep, that's fair.
No, that is fair. I mean, this councillor.
On a point of personal privilege, there has been nothing but gravely serious discussion in this chamber since 10 o'clock this morning. No one is celebrating. I ask that you rule on the councillor's tone.
Councillor Perks just admitted that he's
Well,
celebrating.
Councillor Carroll, there were some councillors that got up and said we were celebrating. Deputy Mayor Minawang, if you can continue, please, and just keep on the topic.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So once again, I'll say that today's a day when this council is going to vote to raise taxes. I do not celebrate about this. I'm quite sad that we have to do this, but it's, for transit and for housing, it's necessary to do. I understand that, but this idea that I hear around the chamber, and I wasn't going to stand up and speak, but this idea of the chamber that raising taxes is a virtue, I don't share that virtue. I think that most members, most of the public would like us to do our best to find efficiencies in the government.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers before we go to the mayor? No? Okay. Mayor Tory, last speaker.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I, of course, rise in support of these measures and having initiated the proposed extension of and enhancement to the City Building Fund, and being the recipient of some of the emails that have been made reference to this morning. I echo the words that I've been told many times over by my own political mentors, and I think we've all been told that, whether it's by parents, because certainly my father used to say this to me, and I'm sure many parents have said this to all of us in here, and we've said it to our own children, which is you can never go wrong doing the right thing. And the right thing, it has to be looked at on whether it's a daily, weekly, or monthly basis, especially in this profession or this vocation that we have chosen. And the fact is that in the last few months, we've had put in front of us for the first time, for example, a definitive list of the state of good repair requirements of the Transit Commission. We've never had it, to my knowledge, in that thorough a fashion before. We have reached, just in the last couple of months, a transit agreement, a historic transit agreement with the province, which I hope finally will allow us to move forward and actually stick to that plan and build that transit. And, of course, we have brought forward here for consideration at this very meeting a Housing TO Action Plan 2020 to 2030 for the next 10 years, which has various ambitions in it that I think we all heard loud and clear in the last election, were things that people expected us to address if the city was going to remain livable and affordable. And so the question that quite fairly arose out of that was how are you going to pay for the initiatives that come out of these plans that have been quite recently agreed to? And the fact is that we can continue, as we must, to achieve efficiencies. And I should say that I will be sticking very closely together with the budget chief, and we've been working very hard on this with our city staff for months now, to the notion that the property tax attributable to the increase in our operating expenditures should be at or below the rate of inflation. And that is the budget that I fully expect will be brought forward. That is the kind of budget that I will vote for. I wouldn't vote for one that had a property tax increase attributable to our operating budget above the rate of inflation, and I believe that very same budget, as has been the case in previous years, will be sufficient to allow us to continue to invest more money in city services. We have invested in previous years that I've been mayor, and we will again this year, a record amount in the Toronto Transit Commission, a record amount with new stable funding features for the Toronto Community Housing Corporation, and so on. Is it enough to solve every problem? I'm not sure we can ever do enough, and I'm not sure that the answer rests in any event in just spending more and saying that that is going to advance us on the way to solving these problems. But you know, I think the way people will look at this, Madam Speaker, is as follows. I think they will look at it and they will say to themselves, not unanimously, because there rarely is unanimity on any of these kinds of things, that they believe this city right now is moving in the right direction. I think people will say the city is moving in the right direction. However, they also understand the fact that we need to do some things to keep it moving in the right direction. They know that in order to continue the success that we've enjoyed in recent years, especially in terms of attracting investment and jobs, because I make no apologies for the fact that I believe that is at the very foundation, it's at the core of our ability to pay for transit and housing and all of the other supports that we provide, especially to those who are more vulnerable, is the economic success of the city. And that means attracting new jobs and new investment so that we can continue to fund these activities. And quite frankly, it raises the notion of who benefits most financially. Aside from the people who have those jobs, governmentally, it is the case that it is the other governments that benefit from Toronto's economic success. But if we want to keep our success going for our own sake, and for the sake of our people and the people who come here, as well as, frankly, for the benefit of those other governments, Ontario and Canada, then we have to invest in order to make sure that we protect that success. And that means investing not exclusively in transit and housing, but it means investing in transit and housing. And the fact is that efficiencies alone cannot produce the amount of money that we need to fulfill our own obligations under the transit and housing agreements. That's just a fact, as hard as we will work at those efficiencies. And so, and that's the difference between finding those tens of millions and even hundreds of millions in savings and finding the billions that we need to invest in the transit and housing, the capital long-term investments that we need. So I'll just say that this will allow us to say that we're doing our share on the transit and housing plans. If they say no, the other governments, to tolls, if they say no to the gas tax, if they say no to pooling, all of which were meant to do two things: to keep us successful and to make sure there's a degree of fairness among those who provide a service and those who use it, then I would say that once we've now said we're putting up our share, we do have to have, as some have said in here, a fundamental look at not so much even the 92 cents versus 8 cents, but the whole notion of what we contribute, and we're happy to do it as a city, to be the economic engine and the financial sustainer of a lot of things in this province, in this country, but do we get back enough to make sure we can look after and sustain the health of the very city that is the economic engine of the country? I will just say, before I conclude, that I will vote against Councillor Deputy Mayor Holliday's motion because I believe that it is premature, and premature in the sense that I think that before you even can have a proper debate on this whole business that he raised this morning, because it was in the Ernst & Young report, that we owe it to do exactly what is happening now, which is our professional public service is looking at all of the recommendations that are not being immediately proceeded with, to examine the implications of them, to examine the administrative task, to examine the fairness and equity of them, and they will come back with their recommendations, and that is the time when we can have that discussion. So that's why I'll vote against that motion. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. I've had a request that we vote on the item after lunch because Councillor Fletcher had a 12:30 appointment. So we'll break for lunch, and then, Councillor, you can ask the question to the mayor when we get back. It's 12:30. Okay? Thank you.